If you're looking for an electric vehicle with a luxury logo on the front, you have more options than ever before, but for 2023, we are finally getting a Lexus full battery electric vehicle. This is the all-new RZ 450e, which is a lot easier to say than the Toyota Busy Forks. First things first, let's talk about the design. The RZ is designed to be sort of the electric Lexus RX. This is about the same size, right, Brian?
Yeah, it's about the same size, but it's a little bit shorter in overall height.
Yeah, and it's really obvious up front.
Yeah, and we've got this two-tone or bi-tone or bi-color paint scheme here. Black hood, sort of like the Toyota Crown, but because we have the spindle body, it kind of looks more integrated and a little bit better executed here, but what do you think?
Yeah, let us know what you think about this down there in the comment section. I am not a big fan of color schemes that are this sort of thing where there's a big stripe running across the front, but this looks a lot better to my eye than what we find in the Crown. I think because this hammerhead section, the spindle grille part right here, that's all black and that blends better with the hood. And the Crown just looks a little bit more awkward from some angles.
And also the trunk of this is not black as part of the two-tone, whereas the Crown does have that black element to the trunk, which I know he does not like. I'm okay with it, but here it's a little bit simpler.
And if you don't like this, you can get an all-body colored one, in which case it definitely looks more integrated than any other Lexus with the grille, because the only spindle sections, I guess, really are these, what do you call those, geometric shapes right there on the outside.
Yeah.
The rest of it is very flat up front.
Yes.
But we do have an illuminated Lexus logo and full LED headlights.
And you should know, if you do like the bi-tone, you do have to go for the top luxury trim to get this.
Size-wise, the RZ is sort of the electric RX. This is just under 190 inches long, and some of the proportions are quite similar to the RX, including the relatively long front overhang and this very long hood, even though it is a little bit lower, as we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, it definitely gives me sort of a station wagon vibe more than an upright crossover look, and I think that's a pretty good thing to me. And you can also
kind of
see
in keeping with the Lexus RX in its current generation.
absolutely,
really.
especially with like this up kink in the window area, and then of course the big blacked out seat pillar back here. Even though the RX has a little bit less of that, but this is going to be pretty much a common design theme with a lot of the Lexus electric vehicles going forward, I'm sure. So.
And charge door right up here on the driver's side. I was surprised by that too, because in a lot of vehicles it's on the passenger side, but over here it's on the driver's side.
Now back here you can see these dual shark fin type spoiler elements that help smooth out airflow, and they help deal with crosswinds according to Lexus, unlike a full spoiler that would actually have some issues with that in a vehicle like this with such a raked rear windshield, or I guess rear glass. But these are actually standard, unlike the BZ4X and the Solterra. Those are optional on those vehicles. Here I think it actually really helps the overall design look pretty sporty.
And speaking of sporty, we have one of the few Lexus models with staggered tires, 255s in the back, 235s up front, standard on every model. But the wheels, those do change. You'll have your choice of 18 or 20-inch wheels, but if you get the 20-inch wheels, you will see a nearly 25-mile reduction in range. I think the reason I like this two-tone setup better than what we find in the Crown is that they've reserved the black section of the paint job just for the upper part of the body. This lower part in the back remains body colored, so I think it just works better to my eye. We have full LED taillight modules, which is a nice touch, including the signature Lexus swoosh and Lexus spelled out across the rear rather than a big L logo in the back.
And yeah, this is definitely my favorite angle of the car. I really like the full width taillight bar, and I appreciate that they have kept amber LED turn signals, but I also kind of see a little bit of the Cadillac lyric in this rear end design, especially from here down, and considering this sculpting on the sides of the fenders in the back.
At the moment, all RZs will be RZ 450Es with Direct 4. That's what they're calling their dual motor all-wheel drive setup. The dual motor setup uses the same building blocks that we find in the BZ4X and the Subaru Solterra, which also ride on this ETNGA platform, but in a different arrangement. We have a 201 horsepower electric motor up front, 107 horsepower motor in the rear, for a total in the US of 308 ponies. If you look at the spec sheets around the world, you'll notice slightly higher power figures. That's the metric output. In the US, 308 horsepower. There's just one battery pack option. It's a 71.4 kilowatt hour pack that's built by a Toyota Panasonic joint venture in Japan. This battery pack is capable of faster charging than you'll find in the all-wheel drive BZ4X in the US, 150 kilowatts peak. According to Lexus, that should be able to get this battery from 0% to 80% in 30 minutes. I don't have a 10% to 80% time. I think it's a little unusual that Lexus has chosen to give us 0% to 80% because that's not the norm when we're talking about comparisons. I suspect it's maybe around 28 minutes or so. That is fairly average for a new EV in the United States. But what is a little bit below average is the range figure. The longest range version of this will come in at 220 miles. If you get the 20-inch wheels like are on this model, it drops down to 196 miles. Also a little unusual is the onboard AC Level 2 charger. It's rated for 6.6 kilowatts, which is certainly on the slow side compared to the 10 and 11 kilowatt chargers you'll find on a majority of new EVs. I have to admit, I'm a little torn on the range and charging figures on this vehicle. When I'm charging at the office, Brian, or at home, I'm actually never charging at 11 kilowatts, even though we currently have a long-term EV6 that is capable of it. I'm actually almost always charging at 6.6 kilowatts, so it wouldn't really make a substantial difference for me. And in our brief surveys from viewers, most of them are actually charging at around 6 kilowatts as well that have EVs. Very few of them, as about 5% of respondents, said that they'd installed a faster level 2 charger at home. And DC fast charging is relatively rare also, but you live in an apartment, so you actually would need to DC fast charge.
I definitely would, especially in Detroit, because there aren't really any charging stations nearby where I live, so I'd have to go somewhere further out where there's more likely going to be DC fast charging stations. But the infrastructure in the Detroit metro area is not exactly up to stuff compared to other metro areas, especially out here in California. But I have a question for you. So coming from an EV6 with a teeny tiny frunk, this does not offer a frunk at all. Do you think that's all right? Just get rid of it. It's going to be tiny. You may as well not have one.
This is also a weird one because the hood is really long, but Lexus was actually pretty upfront about this. They said that they reserved this entire area for the crash structure in the vehicle, which is logical, and that is the same reason that we don't find a massive front trunk in the Mercedes EQS, which is a dedicated battery electric vehicle, or the new Volvo EX90. The EX90 actually has a really tiny front trunk. I was surprised by that, for much the same reason. They wanted to keep the hood low, they wanted that crash structure, and then they have combined the motor and the inverter unit and the charger and everything into one big stacked module right up front.
As you can see right here, there's quite a bit of real estate between the drive unit and this massive crumple zone area. You'd think maybe they would have tried to squeeze in a compartment or something for your level 1 charge cable, but instead they put that back in the trunk area. At this point, you're probably saying to yourself, there are options out there that are faster at charging at DC fast charging stations than this RZ, and that is correct. For example, the eGMP platform vehicles at Hyundai can do the 10% to 80% charge in just around 18 minutes, but of course you have to find the right charging station to make that possible.
That's actually a good point, because especially in inner city areas, you're not going to find that many 350 kilowatt stations even still. And on a 150 kilowatt station, this is going to charge at the same peak rate, theoretically, as one of those eGMP vehicles. Also, 10% to 80% in 18 minutes is not 0% to 80% like Lexus's rating on this. They are a little bit odd on their rating. It would take maybe about 20 minutes to do that in a GV60 or GV70, just a little bit longer. But it is worth noting that taking your eGMP platform Genesis from 0% to 100% is only going to take about 45 minutes. GV70, though, it's about the same size as this, and the GV70 doesn't really get that much more range. It's what, I think 20 miles more?
Yeah, it was about 238, I think is what we saw.
Yeah, something like that. 238, 240 miles. Those official EPA numbers are just coming out now. While we're actually filming this, by the time you're watching this video, the final EPA numbers for this and the GV70 electrified should be out. The seating position up front is a little bit more relaxed than the Lexus NX and pretty similar to the Lexus RX. I apologize if I'm tripping over any of this alphabet soup in this video. We have a two-way adjustable lumbar support for the driver's side. I do wish this was a three-way lumbar, especially in the upper end trims, but we do have a power memory-linked tilt telescopic steering column with 3-position memory over here on the dashboard. Headroom is especially generous because we get a standard glass roof in this vehicle. I have about 3.5 inches of headroom. So if you're looking for an accommodating EV with a lot of ground clearance and a lot of headroom, you might want to take a look at the RZ.
Now over here on the passenger side, I also find these seats to be very comfortable, and at 5'9", I have even more headroom than Alex because that glass roof is so far over to the sides that it is directly above my head, giving me lots of headroom up here. Down here, when it comes to legroom, Lexus did not give us a glove box. Instead, this is where the optional radiator or the heat radiator system is. Therefore, you have all this space down here for your legs to stretch out and be comfortable. Longer legged people are going to be very happy with this. The only thing I don't like about this front seat on the passenger side is the entire lack of lumbar support of any kind. You can't get it even on this top luxury trim.
Now let's check out the back seat. This driver's seat is adjusted for me at 6 feet tall. I have lots of legroom left. You'll find a bit more legroom in here than you'll find in the electrified GV70, definitely more than we find in the GV60 because this is the next category up in terms of its size. Also, a Volvo XC40 Recharge, it's going to be a bit more compact in that dimension. Now, if I scoot over here to this side where Brian is pretending to be really tall, his seat's all the way back in its tracks. You can see I still have about 2 inches of legroom left, and your seat's a little bit reclined there, Brian, or are you pretty comfortable?
I mean, if I did this, I'd be not comfy, but
yeah, so you can see that gives you a little bit of extra room there. If you're interested in an EV that could easily accommodate a rear-facing child seat or taller adults in the back, you should definitely give this a look. I have less headroom than I had up front, but still very generous back here. If I put my head back to the headrest, I have about 3/4 of an inch of headroom left. These seats do offer a limited amount of recline, but you basically just get two positions. It's this upright position right there, where I now get about 1.5 inches of headroom. I actually find this upright position to be a little bit more comfortable, to be honest, or a more reclined position, and then you can lay them flat, but not quite flat with the cargo area in the back. Rear passengers get air vents in the center console, USB-C charge ports, and heated outboard seating positions. And as you'd expect in a dedicated EV platform, we have a nearly flat floor in the back. There is just a very slight hump because that's where the cable to the rear electric motor goes. The interesting thing about the seating position is the ground clearance in the RZ. So even though this is a bit more reclined than the average crossover, you're higher off the ground. This has nearly 8 inches of ground clearance in all versions. If you want more ground clearance in your next EV, you're basically going to be looking at a Hummer or a Rivian, something like the GV60 or a Tesla Model Y. They are notably closer to the ground.
Now it's time to talk about the cargo space. If I had the key in my pocket, which I don't, I could kick to open the tailgate like so. Otherwise, I'm just going to use this button right here. Alex, what do the people need to know about the cargo space?
So back here we have about the same kind of cargo volume that you find in the Lexus RX, just under 24 cubic feet. You will find more cargo space in some of the boxier alternatives, but most of them are going to be gasoline alternatives, not electrified alternatives. Definitely enough room back here for 24-inch or 22-inch roller bags to be upright in this position at the back. But as you can see, we have a pretty raked profile to this opening, and that means that it's going to be a lot less space across the rear. They said they did design this, of course, for golf bags to fit in the back pretty easily, and there is some extra storage space under the load floor. The cargo well is where we find the 120-volt charge cord. No dual voltage cord comes with the vehicle, and almost enough room for a 22-inch roller bag to sit there under the floor. As you can see, not quite enough, but definitely additional room ahead of that. You can also put the cargo cover in that area if you so desire. Let's take a spin around the interior. As we look around, keep in mind that this is the top-end trims. There are going to be features in here you won't find in the base model, like this adaptive glass roof. We press this little button right here, and it instantly becomes clear. The transition is very rapid. This is similar to what we find in some of the Porsche Taycan models, and of course the Toyota Venza. This is the first time it's been applied to a Lexus, and I really hope this makes its way to other EVs, because this is a really cool touch. It really does reduce the amount of light and the amount of heat coming into the cabin, and of course it looks pretty darn cool. From this angle, you can see Brian over there playing with his smartphone in the back. Lots of headroom back there. Moving back up to the front, adjustable shoulder belts and height adjustable headrests. This interior is sort of a medium blue, I guess you'd say, with navy sections right there in the middle. This is a full vegan interior according to Lexus. This is a faux suede material right there in the center. You can also get more of a faux leather material if you're interested in that. These seats are both heated and ventilated, so you can see we have perforations there on the seat bottom cushion and seat back cushion. As far as bolstering goes, it's not terribly aggressive on the seat bottom cushion, a little bit more aggressive on the seat back cushion. Moving over to the front doors, we start finding a very, I guess, austere design, you might say. Very clean, clear lines, very modern feeling. More of that same imitation fabric that we found on the seats. You can see it goes all the way up there to this imitation leather section at the top of the door. Same sort of electric door release handles that we find in other modern Lexus models. Lots of storage spaces down there at the bottom of the door. You can see the debulking that's gone on the dashboard as far as the removal of that glove box from the design. This has a fabric section right here. It's a little bit difficult to see on camera, but this is fabric. That's because there is a heater mat behind it. It's a radiant heat design, which is kind of neat. The one weird touch with the radiant heat panels is that they cannot be activated separately from the heated seats. There are controls right here on the touchscreen. It activates both the heated seat and the radiant panel at the same time. This is a really nice touch because it helps reduce battery usage. It keeps your legs feeling toasty warm on a cold day, and it starts acting faster than heating the cabin. Above that, we have some soft touch materials for the upper section of the dashboard, and a design for the dashboard that definitely looks like a combination of the Lexus RX and the Lexus NX. You see we have this very large LCD right here in the middle of the dashboard, basically the same size that we find in those other hybrid and gasoline Lexus models. CarPlay and smartphone integration happens right up there on top and occupies the full screen. If you want the native interface, you have to go back to that Lexus menu right there. Then you can access things like vehicle settings, the factory navigation, stuff like that. You'll find controls for the climate control down there at the bottom of the screen, along with some physical buttons for things like the rear defroster, the front defogger, volume control right there. USB-C input for the infotainment system, just one, although it does support wireless CarPlay integration. I happen to have mine connected via USB. Nice touch is that this wireless charging mat will support wireless charging through thicker cases. It worked both with my phone and Brian's Android phone as well. Over here we have the automated parking system, the 360-degree camera setup in the vehicle, USB charge only ports. We don't find wood trim in this interior. This does kind of look like wood, but this is an imitation wood panel. I was surprised by that because you do find wood in some Lexus models still, but they seem to be largely moving away from it. We have a rotary style shifter here. You put your foot on the brake pedal, push down on it, rotate it around for drive, rotate it the other way for reverse. Park is that button right there. Two big cup holders. Buttons for the traction and stability control, auto brake hold, electric parking brake, and then a center armrest that opens to the side. There's a reasonable amount of storage going on in there, but not as much as I had expected for a vehicle with a fairly flat floor. There is, however, some storage space right there under that center console, but you don't find a glove compartment that's lockable of any kind in here, so no under-seat storage, nothing like that. In this model, we have a full-color heads-up display just above this relatively small LCD instrument cluster. I find the size of the display surprising because even the current generation RAV4 can have a full 12-inch LCD cluster. This one is fairly small. It's limited to just this center section, even though the binnacle is quite large that houses it. It is configurable as far as the design, but there aren't too many design options to choose from. Moving out from there, we find the same sort of steering wheel we find in other modern Lexuses. Paddles on the back. These serve as adjustable regen paddles in this model. Touch controls for the various controls. You actually use this button and then these touch controls and the heads-up display to decide exactly what you're going to do with the system. Mostly infotainment buttons over here, and then on this side we have the buttons for the adaptive cruise control system, and you can also adjust the heads-up display with those buttons by pressing that lower menu button. On the top of the steering column, you'll see this little module right here with the two eyes staring at you. This is part of the driver attention monitoring system. Not only will it alert you when it thinks you're not paying attention, it helps make sure that you're keeping your eyes on the road when you're using any of the semi-autonomous driving assistant features. The driver also gets a radiant heat panel. It's located on the bottom of the steering column rather than on that section of the dashboard. Now it's time to get the RZ out on the road. The first thing you're going to notice is that this has significantly more power than the related BZ4X. It's really obvious if I come to a stop and just floor it. This has way more power. 0 to 60 should happen in about 5 seconds, although I don't have official 0 to 60 times just yet. That is definitely quicker than any version of the BZ4X, and not too far away from most of the competition, although there are definitely models that will be quicker. The Model Y, of course, will be faster. The Genesis electric vehicles will be faster as well. And unlike some of the competition, Lexus has decided to give us a more powerful electric motor up front than in the rear. So there are definitely times where, say we're going around a corner like this and you give it a little bit of extra oomph, you do feel the steering wheel tugging a bit more than you might in the competition. You will notice the power imbalance occasionally out on your favorite winding mountain road, but it's not as obvious as you might think. It's not as obvious as, say, for instance, one of Lexus's plug-in hybrids or regular hybrid models that definitely have way more power on the front axle. And that's thanks to electric motors delivering a ton of torque and the vehicle being able to spread that torque around however it's needed to help improve handling. Lexus has also decided to give this fairly wide tires. That's 255 with tires in the back, 235 with tires up front. Obviously, I don't have any official stopping scores, but I suspect this is probably going to be right around 120 feet. There will certainly be EVs that will take longer, most notably the bigger battery EVs. So if you wanted to compare this against something like a Ford Mustang Mach-E, that's likely going to take longer to stop because it has skinnier tires and a much bigger battery pack. When it comes to handling, what do you think, Brian? I think it comes across as very well sorted, but the suspension is a little bit firmer than I had expected.
It definitely is a little bit firmer, but you can definitely feel the lower center of gravity too, which is not typical for a Lexus product. This is their first dedicated EV, and that's also another reason why you hear a little bit more of the outside environment. You do hear a little bit more wind noise, a little bit more road noise, but that's because we don't have an engine to muffle and cover those sounds. We also do have those run-flat tires, which are louder than the average tire.
Yeah, and we get a little bit more wind noise at this moment because I have a GoPro on the roof, but you will certainly hear more of that in the cabin. I think that they've done a really good job, however, blending priorities. It is surprising that this feels so nice and stable out on a road like this, even though it has significantly more ground clearance than a Mach-E or an EV6 or a Tesla Model Y. This is not quite as high as the BZ4X and the Solterra, but it's still pretty high off the ground. And you can have a surprising amount of fun.
And I do think an electric powertrain is perfect for a luxury vehicle, especially a Lexus like this, because it's so much more refined feeling, so much more smooth, so much more, I don't know, just put together. If you drive a Lexus hybrid, or you might feel it comes across as, jerky or a little bit less
Yeah, let's smooth.
Less smooth. This is the purest form of, I think, what I consider to be a luxurious driving experience. And now we have it in a Lexus. You definitely have a nice package here because of that.
Yeah, in sport mode, the throttle is a little bit touchy, but
Yeah.
I can put it down here to normal drive mode where I get the exact same amount of power, same 0 to 60 time. Things are a little bit more muted as far as the throttle application, and the fake engine motor noise is definitely reduced. Interesting twist is when we put it in Eco, you get the same 0 to 60 time if you hold your foot on the floor, but that fake noise is even more muted. I think that I wish it was turn-offable, like you could just disable it.
I do wish it was separate from the drive modes because there are some other competitors that will allow that, and there are some other competitors that have more drastic of a difference. A BMW or a Mercedes EV, you can definitely go from loud to pretty quiet, or like a Kia EV6 definitely has more of a variety between the sounds. This is more muted, more Lexus-like.
The RZ offers a custom drive mode where you can adjust certain vehicle settings, pair different steering profiles with different powertrain profiles, etc. But speaking of powertrain profiles, it is interesting. There are 4 different drive modes. There's Sport, there's Normal, there's Eco, there's Range. I guess there's 5 because there's Custom there. But Eco and Range are the interesting twist here because Eco adapts the climate control and accessories for more economic operation. Range adapts that plus the drivetrain. I sort of wish they'd just given us one mode because that is a little bit confusing. But in the Range mode, it becomes a predominantly rear-wheel drive EV. They mainly disable the front electric motor, but they don't mechanically disconnect it like we find in some EVs.
And Range mode also turns off the HVAC control. However, interestingly, you can turn it back on and still remain in Range mode. That, of course, will just increase your range a little bit more, but the way to get the most out of the RZ in terms of driving distance.
And at least according to the Guessometer, it does have a fairly decent impact on range. Now, remember that the Guessometer there is exactly what I call it. It's based on your driving over the last few miles and, of course, the day of driving so far. So even though the battery is about 3/4 full, it thinks we're only going to go 117 miles because we spent a lot of time in a parking lot filming the vehicle. Based on our average consumption, which even driving it hard out here on this road has been 3.5 miles per kilowatt hour, you should easily be able to get 220 to 225 miles of range out of this. So I think that Lexus has chosen a slightly more conservative approach when it comes to range. It's worth noting that this battery may be about 72 kilowatt hours in capacity, but the usable capacity is only about 64 kilowatt hours. So Lexus is extremely conservative with the battery. They're really sheltering a lot of it for the extended lifetime. That means that you can much more easily and more conscionably, I guess, charge this to 100% of indicated, which is something that you shouldn't do on a Tesla Model Y or a Rivian because they allow you to access that entire pack if you want to. Some folks might be disappointed in that, but here's, I guess, the twist is if you're only regularly charging your Tesla Model Y battery to 80%, you're not actually going to get that much more range out of it. You will, but you won't get that much more than if in this vehicle you charged it to an indicated 100% all the time, and you're basically treating the battery the exact same way. You're being careful with both batteries.
And one thing I find interesting, you'd think Lexus would want to maximize range, especially in that range mode, but they make it so you only have access to the smaller motor in the back. And you'd think you'd want to use the front motor because regen is more, palpable when you have the front motor involved, but instead we're using the back one that's less powerful, which I guess that makes sense. But
yeah, for the acceleration, using the back motor makes sense because it seems to be a more efficient motor design. For regen, it seems to be using the front motor, although I wasn't able to get an official answer from the Lexus engineer. But most likely, the front electric motor is what's being used for the braking regen. You get more braking potential, more regen potential on the front electric motor. And since this does not have a mechanical disconnect, it's just going to be easy to start including that in the equation. You'll notice that the vast majority of EV designs generally regen on the front electric motor. But I have to say I'm with you there that it's surprising they didn't just use the front motor rather than the rear, because when we take a look at the eco modes, say in Polestars and Volvos, they actually use the front electric motor, not the back.
So we have regen paddles. How serious does it get when you go all the way to the highest setting?
Not as serious as some, and we don't have a one-pedal drive mode. So right now we're in almost coasting. It's very, very little regen. I can click this all the way down to its most aggressive regen setting, starting there at 40 miles an hour. Going down. We're at 20 now. It will eventually stop right around 5 miles an hour and then just keep crawling right there at that speed. If you're in some of the competition that offers paddles like this, it will take you to a complete stop. And of course, most of the competition offers true one-pedal driving. Now, personally, I'm not the biggest fan of one-pedal driving, and in my own EV, I have it off all the time. So it doesn't bother me at all, but if that's a feature you're interested in, obviously you're going to want to look elsewhere. I will say that some independent studies and some EV manufacturers as well agree that throttle liftoff regen being very aggressive and one-pedal driving can actually reduce your overall efficiency, especially if you're driving on a winding road like this. Now, it can be really practical and handy in stop-and-go traffic, but for maximum efficiency, blended braking is generally the way to go. And blended braking is when I just take my foot off the accelerator pedal and I put my foot on the brake pedal and it regens more power into the battery. That's what Lexus is doing here, just like every other hybrid and plug-in hybrid in the Lexus lineup. But some companies don't believe in blended braking, like Tesla and Rivian, for instance. There's no blended braking. When you put your foot on the brake, it's just activating friction brakes. This goes a slightly different path, which I generally agree with, and I have to admit that the brake pedal feel here is much better than in Lexus's hybrids, although the initial brake application does feel a little light to me.
Personally, I don't mind one-pedal driving, but I do like with the eGMP vehicles from Hyundai, you have the ability to just hold down a paddle and bring yourself to a stop without even pushing the brakes. I wish they had included something like that here, just to give you a variety of choices instead of just having, mediocre regen at all times, and really at the maximum level too. So, pick your poison.
Although we haven't been able to take the RZ off-road, this is going to be a little bit more capable than the average EV in America, regardless of segment, really. If you want something more capable than this, you're looking at a very limited number of competitors. Perhaps something like a Jaguar I-Pace with the air suspension. Obviously, that's going to take you up to a little bit more ground clearance. Outside of this, you're really looking at a Hummer or a Rivian, a very limited number of EVs. This is logically going to be more appropriate for someone that lives in a colder climate and is concerned about ground clearance in snow, etc., or perhaps mild off-roading. But I don't know how many people are really going to off-road their RZ.
Yeah, I think that should be left to the Subaru Solterra or even the BZ4X for that matter.
But the RZ in a way benefits from the joint development cycle with Subaru, even though we don't have the drive modes like we find in the BZ4X
no
and
X
Solterra.
mode.
No X mode here, but obviously this traction control system was designed with a lot of those same principles in mind, so it is kind of intriguing there. And again, if you're living in an area where you're worried about clearance for snow or tree branches or things like that, this may give you a little bit of extra peace of mind. We also have a heat pump system on board, so more efficient heating for the cabin, and those radiant heating mats under the dashboard, which I have to admit are pretty darn cool.
Yeah, the only thing is you have to turn on the heated seats. So if you want your radiant heater on, you also have to have your butt heated. So
yeah, and that's a weird choice because in the BZ4X, if I'm not mistaken, they are separate.
They are separate.
Yeah, so I'm not the biggest fan of needing my butt warm when I want my legs warm. I would like those two features to be a little bit more separate.
Yeah, me too.
If you want to get your hands on the new RZ, these should be on sale very shortly, but Lexus is only bringing about 5,000 of them to the United States for the first model year. So if you want one, you'd better act fast and contact your local Lexus dealer right away. It's going to start at $59,650, including destination for the base version, and the pricing range is shockingly narrow for a modern EV. It's $59,650 or $65,150 for the fully loaded version that we're taking a look at today. Obviously, some of that is because the range is a little bit lower than the competition, but also Lexus decided they really wanted to simplify the lineup. So luxury package is where you're going to find the standard 20-inch wheels with summer tires, acoustic laminated glass, the self-parking, the radiant heaters, the 10-inch heads-up display, and the Mark Levinson audio system. But the base version is very well equipped and comes standard with that 308 horsepower all-wheel drive system. Now, charging is a little on the slow side for the segment, but I have to admit, the pricing lineup makes an awful lot of sense, assuming that you're not paying over sticker for the vehicle. This is definitely less expensive than the upcoming electrified GV70 from Genesis. That's probably the closest competitor in this segment. We do have something like the Volvo XC40, but it is significantly smaller than this on the outside and on the inside. It's a subcompact vehicle. It's actually smaller than the Lexus NX. It's more Lexus UX sized. Now, very obviously, the elephant in the room has to be the Tesla Model Y, because of course it's the volume seller. It's selling way beyond 5,000 units a year. It's going to charge faster. It's going to give you longer range. Some versions may be less expensive and some versions may be more expensive depending on your tax situation, because it is going to qualify for at least some portion of the federal tax credit. Because this is built in Japan with a battery pack that is built in Japan, it does not qualify for any of that $7,500. Now, the tax credit situation on new EVs is pretty complicated, and recent judgments have actually said that leases should be able to get the full tax credit now. So exactly what your situation looks like will depend on whether you want to buy it or lease it, whether you would get any or all of that federal tax credit if it would apply to you. Speaking of leasing, I would expect that the vast majority of these will be leased, just like we see in mainstream luxury vehicles, period. And the lease rate on this is likely going to be lower than the lease rate on a Tesla Model Y, although I don't have official data on that just yet. So as always, stay tuned because hopefully I will have more of that detail just as soon as I can. Now it's time for some jabber and some comparisons. I think that my opinion of the dual color paint job has softened somehow magically in the last 2 hours. What about you?
I never had a really big problem with it. We don't have a color that shows it off as well as some others out there, but I think it does blend in nicely with the sort of gray exterior we have.
I'm surprised that Lexus didn't bring out any blingy colors because this is obviously this is probably gonna be what a lot of people will shop for in the real world, but it does show up better on that lighter blue that they had earlier. There isn't really a blingy premier color though on this. It's not like you can get an orange one, right?
Not really. You know, Genesis GV60 has that really kind of lime green color that you can get. There's nothing like that on this car.
And speaking of the Genesis lineup, to my imagination, that is the closest direct competitor to this, because Genesis has had a reputation for building reliable vehicles. I think they're very style forward. They have a lineup that now includes 3 full EVs, which is kind of surprising. They've been going gangbusters on that, but it is more expensive than this. And the electrified GV70 doesn't actually give you much more range. It's like, what, 20 miles?
About 20 miles or so, yeah. So,
which would you get?
I mean, I think I prefer the Genesis interior and exterior design. I like that it's a faster charging vehicle. The price difference is, you know, it's substantial, but not enough for me to say I wouldn't even consider the Genesis over this. They're definitely closely matched in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So.
And they're probably going to lease pretty similarly.
Yeah. And a plus for the electrified GV70 is that it's actually going to be built right here in Alabama. So it will qualify for the federal tax credit to some extent. Again, this will not at all.
Yeah, and we don't know exactly how much of the federal tax credit yet because it's going to be built in the United States. That should get it half the credit. Whether the battery pack is sourced from the right places could get it the other half of the credit, but we won't know any of that detail until a little bit later. I think that really is a solid competitor to this. You know, I might consider the Lexus because it is a little bit roomier inside in some dimensions. Similar cargo area, a bit roomier inside, a little bit better priced. And for me, some of this is going to come down to maybe your brand preference. Do you like Lexus? Do you like Genesis? And are you interested in what Toyota and Lexus have said is their design goal for this battery pack? Not a promise, but they said their design goal for this battery pack is shockingly low loss of range over its lifetime. My memory's a little bad on this, but it's something like a 90% range after 10 years and 100,000 miles is the design goal for the BZ4X, and this is likely going to be very similar. So if you're looking for a vehicle that's going to still drive like it was when it's new, that's battery powered, this may be one of the best choices. We don't know whether it will meet that lofty goal, but if that's their design intent from the beginning, you can be sure this is probably going to be closer to that than some other EVs out there.
And to give it some credit, we really don't know that kind of detail about the Genesis side of things.
That's true, yeah.
They don't have
and
really
we don't know what that fast charging is going to do to the battery. This is one of those things that I'm really torn about. It's like, yeah, I love the ability to fast charge my battery really fast, but if I take a look at, say, my MacBook, you know, I charge it every day and its battery pack says it's already lost about 10% of its lifetime. Same sort of thing happens on an EV, and it can happen relatively rapidly. Whether this performs better than that Genesis, we won't know for about 5 or 6 more years, I would say. But at any rate, if you want one of these, head down to your Lexus dealer, and of course, hit that subscribe button so you can be updated on all of our latest videos. Find us at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and have I left anything out?
TikTok.
Yes, the TikToks. Go in TikTok.